Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizengauzen. Today is November 11th and we have a packed episode ahead. So in this episode, the FSB has uncovered the crime of the century. It turns out that Ukraine allegedly wanted to hijack a Russian plane with a nuclear missile and strike a NATO base. What's wrong with the Russian version of events? Today we're going to completely tear it apart. Russian oil refineries are burning again, and this time at a distance of 1,500 kilometers from the border. The anniversary of the liberation of Kherson is one of the most important days of this war, and we have news from the Crimean partisans, what is happening in Crimea right now, how fear and paranoia are spreading across the peninsula, and also how Donald Trump prevented World War III and how India is stabbing Russia in the back. All this and more in today's episode. If you're new to this channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. And so the crime of the century has been solved. According to the Russian FSB, Ukraine allegedly wanted to hijack a Russian MiG-31 fighter jet armed with a Kinzhal aeroballistic missile and attack a NATO base in Romania. Well, I don't know what happened. Either the FSB leadership got high on some kind of magic powder again and made up a new story. Well, let's go through everything step by step. So, today this is the news of the day in Russia. The FSB claims to have prevented the hijacking of the plane, practically saving NATO from being dragged into the war. So they claim that the Ukrainian GUR, the main intelligence directorate, tried to recruit Russian pilots to fly these MiG-31 planes, along with Kinzhal missiles. Let me remind you, the Kinzhal is a potential nuclear warhead carrier, and not just the GUR, but also their British handlers, because how could it be without them? This is the official FSB version. And so, we supposedly tried to recruit these Russian pilots, but they turned to the FSB in time, and from that point on, everything was under FSB control. You know, it feels like when the FSB can't solve real cases, they expose cases that were made up by their own structures. So it turns out the FSB claims that journalists from Bellingcat were also involved in the recruitment scheme. Wow, that's quite an operation they've got there. So, a journalist talked to the pilot, then suggested he speak with the GUR, and then the GUR supposedly proposed hijacking the plane. Well, according to these arrangements, the aircraft was supposed to arrive in Ukraine yesterday, but instead of sending the plane, Russian forces struck the Starokonstantinov airfield, which, as it turns out, was where the aircraft from Russia was supposed to fly to. That's some serious twisting of the story. That's some serious twisting. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if, according to their version, the head of the GUR, Kirill Budanov, personally recruited these pilots. And that's not all. So why would we Ukrainians need a Russian plane with a Kinzhal missile? According to them, the GUR intelligence service was planning to send the plane with the Kinzhal missile to the area of the largest NATO airbase in southeastern Europe, which is located in Constanța, Romania, where this plane would have been shot down by air defense systems, and that's where NATO was supposed to get involved. A Russian plane, out of nowhere, attacks a NATO base, or maybe doesn't attack but gets shot down. With air defense systems involved, that's it. NATO gets drawn into the war. Honestly, when I read this, they even showed some kind of video. Some pilot, obviously they changed his voice and covered his face with a helmet. He was telling how he was recruited there. The pilot looks about 13 years old probably, at least that's how it seems. So, let's just completely tear apart this whole FSB version right now. This scheme, it has a lot of issues in general. There are so many points of failure in this scheme that it's easy to expose, because in reality, there are aerial reconnaissance tools, radars, satellites, so it's impossible not to see where this plane took off from, that it took off, ended up flying to Ukraine, took off from Ukraine, flew over the Black Sea, over to Constanța, where the base is located on the coast. You know, this actually reminded me of another story, the Ukrainian trace in the attack on Crocus City Hall. Remember how the Russians reported that apparently these perpetrators were supposed to drive from Moscow, rush across the front line here to Ukraine just to get a bag of cash? As always. By the way, for some reason we don't hear anything about that version anymore. What happened? Have they solved the Crocus case already? And one more important point, which all Ukrainians know, What happens when even a single MiG, one of those Kinzhal missile carriers, takes off from a Russian airfield? What happens? All Ukrainians know the answer to this question. An air raid alert is triggered across all of Ukraine. All the regions light up red, the sirens start blaring. Even if just one MiG takes off from an airfield, say from Sevastopol or Akhtubinsk, how was it supposed to fly here, to Starkon, to the Starokostiantynov airfield, without being detected by reconnaissance, radars, or NATO satellites? And just for a second, that's in Khmelnytsky region. It can't fly from Ukrainian territory into Romania. Crossing the border would be way too obvious. So according to the Russian version, it was supposed to attack a NATO base from the Black Sea. He needs to fly like this across half of Ukraine, exit over the Black Sea, and... Constance, how is this possible? If there are several NATO reconnaissance aircraft operating over the Black Sea every day, I don't understand. Well, let's assume a completely improbable scenario. Suddenly, all NATO radars turned off, all NATO planes landed, no one was working, and so this stolen MiG with a Kinzhal is racing over the Black Sea and approaching, so close to a NATO base that they're about to attack it. Let's say they shoot it down. And then what? Will NATO get dragged into the war? Oh, please. Who is going to get involved there? On November 24th, 2015, Turkey shot down a Russian Su-24M bomber. Turkey is a NATO country. Well, in this case, it would have been Romania, a NATO country, that shot it down. And then what? Did NATO get dragged into a war? Did World War III break out? No one cared. Putin was simply humiliated, that's all. Erdogan showed that you can and should shoot down a Russian plane. Well, in general, this version is, of course, wonderful. But the FSB, honestly, I don't know. It seems to me they're doing this for Putin. Like, look, let's hang a couple of medals or orders on us. We just prevented the hijacking of the century. I'll prove to you right now that the FSB and the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, every time they come up with a new scenario, they do a very poor job. A very poor job. They can come up with a version, but when it comes to the details, it's just... So, one of the latest examples, this was an official statement from the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service. They claimed that the drones that flew into Poland, some of which were launched from Belarus, were not from Russia after all. Supposedly, Ukraine reprogrammed Russian drones mid-flight, and that's how they ended up in Poland. Then why would Ukraine not reprogram all the other attack drones that are flying at us in large numbers? That's a mystery. That's the mystery of the century. And how Ukraine supposedly launched these drones from Belarusian territory into Poland is also a mystery. And now my favorite part. Fasten your seatbelts, friends. This is a textbook classic. So as you know, the Foreign Intelligence Service has its own website. And there they post various versions of different events. That could potentially happen. And here's my favorite. This is from a recent one, but at the end you're in for not just a cherry on top, but a whole watermelon on the cake. So here's the version from the Foreign Intelligence Service. Ukraine, together with the United Kingdom, is allegedly preparing a provocation in the Baltic Sea, where one of the scenarios involves staging a supposed Russian torpedo attack on a US Navy ship. Just think about that for a second. It is claimed that Kiev has already been supplied with torpedoes, either of Soviet or Russian manufacture. So basically that's how, together with the Brits, we supposedly wanted to hit a US Navy ship in the Baltic Sea with a Soviet torpedo. The main question, so that's the story they came up with. Well done. It's a good story, a nice one. But where exactly was Ukraine supposed to launch these torpedoes from in the Baltic Sea? Now let me show you something. Any of their versions just falls apart completely. I mean, sure, you can launch torpedoes from ships or submarines. All right. But you still have to somehow get those torpedoes to the Baltic Sea. You need carriers, ships, or submarines. So a ship or a submarine would have had to enter the Baltic Sea. And the ship is immediately ruled out because on the surface it would be traveling through the Danish Straits, through areas where it would be spotted and recorded 100 times over. So that's out of the question. The submarine. Oh, so that's it. Well, maybe that's the theory. So a submarine, let's say Ukraine was given some kind of Russian or Soviet torpedo. So Now, this submarine would need to be equipped with that torpedo, and then the submarine would have to quietly, without anyone seeing or noticing, be sent into the Baltic Sea through those same narrow Danish straits. Let me remind you, the Baltic Sea is completely under surveillance. First of all, it's shallow. The maximum depth is 500 meters, and the average is 50 meters. And it's constantly monitored by NATO radars and various other means. But all right, let's say the submarine managed to slip through unnoticed into the Baltic Sea. Now it's just sitting there with the torpedo. But here, there's perhaps one crucial point we've reached in this story, which the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service failed to consider. Ukraine doesn't have a single submarine, not one. There was one, the Zaporizhzhia, but the Russians captured it in annexed Crimea. So, with what was Ukraine supposed to fire a torpedo? No, alright, then there's another version. Since, together with the British, we're supposedly preparing a torpedo strike on an American ship, maybe the British will provide us with a submarine or a ship. So how exactly would a British submarine carry out the attack? A Soviet or Russian torpedo, an American ship? An American ship in order to frame Russia? Yes. Well, they really are amazing, of course, the imbeciles sitting there in that foreign intelligence service, but lying is just in their blood. And they still talk about some kind of honor, some kind of officers, I don't know, words. What kind of officers are you? You have neither honor nor conscience. There are no more officers left in your Russian army. All those who came here to kill Ukrainians are not officers, they are bio-garbage. So forget once and for all about your orders and medals for killing. Later you'll be hiding them. Later, like Wehrmacht soldiers, you'll be burying them in the ground and running wherever your eyes can see if you aren't found first. Perhaps, by the way, the most famous case when a Soviet plane was actually hijacked was during the Soviet Union era. It was the case of Lieutenant Belenko, a famous incident, a disgrace for the Soviet Union, a terrible disgrace. On September 6, 1976, he flew a MiG-25P interceptor to Japan. He flew over and he had prepared for it. His motives are still unclear. There are different theories. But in general, that plane at the time, with a lot of secret equipment on board, the Soviet lieutenant, he was a senior lieutenant at the time, flew over, having calculated everything so precisely that he barely made it, landed on the island of Hokkaido, and because the runway there was short, he overshot it, but still managed to save the plane. He flew away, received political asylum in the United States and later American citizenship. And on September 6th, he left. By the 9th, he was already in the US. The plane was taken apart down to the last screw, thoroughly studied by both Japanese and American specialists, and only on November 15th was it finally returned to the Soviet Union. The most interesting thing, and this is why I started talking about this historical version, is that both the Soviet Union and Russia have always lied terribly. Back then, the USSR's version was that Senior Lieutenant Belenko made a forced landing in Hokkaido due to a lack of fuel. He was criminally abducted by the Japanese authorities at the behest of Washington. Well, of course, no one wanted to admit that they had traitors and defectors, and this wasn't an isolated case, but it was one of the most striking ones. Now, let's move on to Magyar sanctions, one of your favorite segments in this program. Magyar sanctions and the power of Ukraine's unmanned systems. Another strike was carried out on the Saratov oil refinery last night. This is one of the oldest oil refineries in Russia, and it's part of the Rosneft structure. You see, Donald Trump imposes economic sanctions against Rosneft, while Magyar imposes direct action sanctions. This plant processes up to 5 million tons of oil per year and supplies the Volga region. Let's take a look at how it happened.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
It's beautiful, of course, but these strikes, this is already the 5th strike on this plant in just a month. They're hitting it constantly, and I think they'll definitely finish it off. And another refinery, Orsk, Nefteorgzintes in the Orenburg region. This refinery has 4 primary processing units operating, and its capacity is already close to 7 million tons of oil per year. And it got hit too. Judging by the footage, some fierce drones were flying in there. These are the kinds of drones Ukraine has, just amazing. And it was attacked on October 3rd as well. This plant produces a lot of products, including diesel fuel, oils, and aviation kerosene for the Russian military-industrial complex. And this plant is 1,500 kilometers from the border. They're whining again over there. It's on the border with Kazakhstan, complaining that something came in from Kazakhstan again. We don't know anything about that. Ukrainian drones have shown that they can already fly up to 2,000 kilometers. So take it and sign for it. Friends, let me remind you, the fundraiser for the 1st Medical Battalion for our combat medics, an important fundraiser, is ongoing. We are now raising money for a second artificial lung ventilation device, the Hvardeiskoe 202, and for it. This is for the frontline surgical group of the 1st Separate Medical Battalion, for our combat medics, for our guardian angels who truly risk their lives every day to save the lives of our defenders. Please watch this video.
Апарат штучної вентиляції легень – незамінна річ для надання невідкладної допомоги в умовах бойових дій. Ми в 1-му окремому медичному батальйоні використовуємо спеціальні портативні системи забезпечення для використання у військових умовах. Це найкращий інструмент, але, на жаль, він не призначений для такого навантаження та роботи в безперебійному режимі, яка є в наших умовах зараз. Тому ці системи починають виходити з ладу. Через це ми потребуємо додаткових звичайних стаціонарних апаратів ШВЛ. Залишитися без них не можна, адже це призведе до серйозних наслідків. Вартість одного апарату – 730 тисяч гривень, а всього потреба є у 8. Разом з каналом Бориса Тізенгаузена збираємо на другий ШВЛ для передових хірургічних груп 1-го окремого медичного батальйону. Часу обмаль. Розраховуємо на вашу підтримку.
Let's help our medical workers. They're just such bright people. It's like they radiate a kind of glow. They're really amazing. All of them are so young, they should be living, enjoying the best years of their lives now. Going to the movies, dating. But here they are at such a young age saving the lives of our soldiers. Well, that's what Ukrainians are like, you know? That's who they are. Putin made a big mistake by attacking. Choke on Ukraine. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. There's Mono, there's Privat, and PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. I always want to say a huge thank you to you, personally from me, from our soldiers, from our combat medics. You are simply amazing. You are a great force. And thank you for your help. For those who find it more convenient, there's also a QR code you can use. By the way, friends, the vehicle we recently raised funds for Ivan with the call sign Pastor, for the real pastor. In his civilian life, he's a real pastor. And now his call sign is Pasta, and he is still a real Pasta, but now he's fighting in the Kharkiv region. Right now he's in the hospital. And the vehicle for his comrades has already arrived. And here is a photo of Ivan's happy comrades. So for that, a huge thank you to you as well. We're doing something really important. Well, today is a special day for the residents of Kherson. Today is the anniversary of Kherson's liberation from the Russian occupiers. I remember how our troops entered Kherson when the Russians were fleeing from there. Remember, before that, someone named Surovikin was still there. He said, we have to make tough, difficult decisions there, and so on and so on. What tough decisions, right? And our soldiers were entering, Ukrainian flags everywhere. I just remember at that moment. But I remember I had 2 acquaintances in Kiev who, when Kherson was occupied, left from there, they rushed home right away. They found some car and sped off. There was so much joy for people. They were welcoming our Ukrainian soldiers. And I remember how the Russians were received. They practically had to drive their tanks over people because people were blocking the roads. In short, it was such a joyful day for the residents of Kherson, so I want to take this opportunity to send my warmest regards to Kherson and to the people of this wonderful city. And this was why it was probably the most important event of this war. It was the only regional center that the Russians managed to occupy after the full-scale invasion. And the fact that they were driven out from there, that moment gave great hope that Ukraine could and would go on to liberate all of its land. It was a very powerful moment in the war and an important moment for Ukraine. And this is for those who, now Russia is talking about Pokrovsk. Will we take Pokrovsk or not? Just imagine, they were driven out of the huge city of Kherson, expelled from there like devils. So, with the proper level of support for Ukraine, anything is possible. And more news also from the south, from my beloved Crimea, where I was born. We've established good contact with the Crimean partisans here. And so there will be more information coming from Crimea. I think for Crimeans, for people like me, for example, who can't go back to their homeland, it will be interesting to know what internal processes are happening there now. Actually, I think everyone will find it interesting. And there's something quite interesting going on. First of all, there's creeping paranoia and fear. That's why new rules are emerging for the occupiers on the peninsula. After the strikes, numerous strikes on oil refineries, on oil depots, after hits on military facilities, after the radar was taken out, partially blinding them and creating gaps in the air defense system, a lot of people have become tense. And so here are the new rules. First of all, to cross the Crimean Bridge now, you have to fill out a form specifying the make of your car, the model, the license plate number, and your documents. Electric cars are completely banned from entering the Crimean Bridge. Do you know why? Because these savages think that the batteries of electric cars could be used to conceal an explosive device. Can you imagine this, the Crimean Bridge and a battery, and what an explosive device of that size could do to the bridge? Honestly, I have no idea. And besides, they don't X-ray all the cars there anyway. I mean, the same kind of space could be found in any car. So why do they let all the other cars through? Well, that's how it is. They're now overly cautious, scared to death about this so-called sacred object. For Putin, the Crimean Bridge is just a sacred object. For him, it's like a concrete bond that he threw over Crimea and pulled it in. All mine, my precious. That's how Putin thinks now. Well, what can you do? I think trouble will come. Well, trouble in quotes, of course. For all normal people, that monstrosity, the Crimean Bridge, should be destroyed. So it will come, it will be reached, and it will happen. Ukrainian special services have already managed to do it twice. The situation with gasoline there is extremely difficult. You won't find 95 octane at gas stations at all, and 92 octane, well, you can find it in some places. At some small gas stations, there's no gasoline at all right from the start. And now I'll tell you about the strikes on Hvardeiskoe and the oil depot in Sevastopol and in Bitumnoe, as it turns out. I didn't know about Bitumnoe, only about Sevastopol, but the partisans provided the information. So they really hit Feodosia hard. Of course, the largest oil depot burned down, and in Hvardeiskoe, Bitumnoe, and my hometown Sevastopol, the oil depots were also hit. Well, what can you do? And what's interesting is they're tightening the screws. With a new scheme, that is, they're resorting to blackmail with an administrative or criminal case. Right now, there's total chaos with the documents. Some of them are still Ukrainian, some are Russian. So it's easy for them to claim that you illegally registered land or built a property. They slap you with an administrative case, then say there's a huge fine. If you don't want to pay the fine, then you'd better sign the contract. So there are new attractions for those who have come to Crimea. In general, the partisans send you their regards. And they also ask to pass on this information that, well, let's put it as a question. We're being asked whether people ever get tired of resisting the occupation regime since 2014. People still write in, people share important information. People are not tired of the war, they are tired of the occupiers in Crimea. New partisans are emerging, and there are also those who have called themselves Crimean partisans for years. Everyone is making their own contribution to our shared victory. And taking this opportunity, I want to send a big, big hello to our partisans in Crimea and, accordingly, to you from them as well. It's not the first time I've heard this story. Lately, it really grates on the ear that we constantly have to monitor Russian TV and Russian media, and this phrase keeps coming up. Russian code? Russian code. That's what's trendy for them right now. They have this Russian code everywhere. They shove it in everywhere, as if there's some separate Russian code. I don't know what Medinsky was talking about. An extra chromosome in Russians. Now they've made a bunch of propaganda nonsense about it, about this code, about their uniqueness. how they defeated everyone and so on. So I came across one fragment recently. In it, there's a couple. The acting is absolutely terrible, just awful, but they're discussing this Russian code. And what are they saying? They've made some whole series on this topic, that Russia, just think about the message they're sending, Russia, which tries to expand at the expense of neighboring countries, actually through this expansion, gives much more culturally to those it conquers. In this way, Russia enriches those it conquers. It's just incredible. Keep your kokoshniks, bast shoes, birch bark, I don't know, some kulebyaka, whatever else you have. Keep it, live in your swamps, don't bother your neighbors. Let me show you how they enrich their neighbors. Just look at what Ukrainian cities look like now, the ones they've enriched. Once people lived in these cities, raised children, went to work, there were dances, there were holidays, concerts, I don't know, people went out into nature, and now ruins, that's all the Russian Federation leaves behind, enriches, you say. By the way, from viewers, I'm getting a lot of messages now. I went into my spam folder on Facebook, and I was just shocked at how much is there. There's a lot of useful stuff, first of all, well, along with the usual, I should burn in hell, and so on, same as always. My slight schizoid tendencies basically allow me not to react to all of that, but when it comes to useful things, I definitely pay attention. So thank you very much for that. Someone sent something from Hungary. It's a sample of the questionnaire that Orbán handed out to Hungarians. There's a preamble in it. At the beginning of the questionnaire, it says how evil, bad, and scary Brussels wants to take money away from Hungarians, from their poor families, to take away businesses and money from there. Basically, this is the kind of nonsense Orbán is pushing there with these questionnaires. In exactly the same way he turns people against Ukraine with his questionnaires. Nothing ever changes. But thanks for this kind of information. It gives an understanding of how things actually happen on the ground there. Trump stated that he prevented World War III. That means no one has any doubts at all. Donald Trump said that Russia's war against Ukraine will not escalate into a world war, although such a threat was real at the beginning of this year. If I had been president, this war would never have happened. And if I hadn't been president, this war could have led to World War III. This won't happen again, said Donald Trump. You know what? I have no doubt at all that Donald Trump could end this war. The US has all the tools for this, absolutely. In fact, everything is already prepared for this. All that's left is to sign the sanctions. A 500% tariff, a 100% tariff. The Pentagon also has no objections to the transfer of Tomahawks. All in all, for me, it's still a mystery, why under Joseph Biden we were so persistently discouraged, I would even say forbidden, from striking Russian oil refineries. Lloyd Austin himself and the Pentagon are saying we shouldn't do this. So what, now we're striking? And what's happening? And by the way, everyone seems to have lost track of Lavrov somewhere. They say he fell out of favor after a disastrous conversation with Marco Rubio. Rumor has it he's been locked up somewhere at the racetrack. But here he pops up and says, no, I'm still alive, but his face looks very sad. And do you know what Lavrov said? He said that the instincts of colonizers and pirates have awakened in Europeans. No matter how the scheme to seize Russian money is arranged, there is no legal way to do it, Lavrov said. And who is it here talking about legal ways? And who is it here suddenly remembering international law? Well, look at that. And Lavrov said that Russia will give an adequate response to any acts of banditry in accordance with the principle of reciprocity. Go ahead, what are you going to freeze over there? 300 billion in European assets in Russia? Or what? Are you going to bomb Voronezh or seize McDonald's again for a second time, which by the way is now called Vkusno i Tochka in Russia? And remind me, who is it now that attacked their neighbor and is bargaining to keep a bigger chunk of someone else's land? And also says, I won't give the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant back to Ukraine. So who turns out to be the colonizer and pirate here? How utterly cynical these bastards are, right? Putin, with his military-style humor and strange mannerisms, hasn't answered direct questions from journalists for about 20 years now. All those direct line sessions with Russians, those planted journalists and so on, it's all completely staged. Imagine sitting him down in front of tough journalists and not letting him leave the room. He'd be rolling his eyes, as he likes to do, moving his legs like propellers, spinning on his heels, gripping the table until his fingers turn blue. That's exactly what he does. Remember how it was in Alaska? I think that's the only uncomfortable question he's been asked in the last 10 years, and even then, he didn't answer it. Someone shouted at him in Anchorage, Alaska, when he started making some faces at some crazy old man, pulling those weird expressions. That's Putin in a nutshell, you see? A cowardly, piss-scared, pardon my French, paper rat. Well, so, to top it off, as they say, India has already started negotiations with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to replace Russian oil. Well, India, and I think soon China as well. We'll see. Let's see how it turns out. At the very least, this is the first real step toward depriving Russia of its military budget. Well, Putin will just take it from healthcare, take it from some social sector. What are you going to do, Russians? You'll keep paying until you drop. You'll keep paying for this war until you say stop. And you friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and subscribe to this channel. Let's support our medics, the 1st Separate Medical Battalion. The details for supporting our combat medics, our guardian angels, are in the description of this video. Wishing us all a peaceful day, and glory to Ukraine.